Okay, now it's mute.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone see me okay? Fantastic. Yeah, if you'll shut that. Okay, so welcome to the webinar this morning. I'm Ben Driggs, and we really appreciate your joining us. I am going to share my screen. I got to figure out how to do this. Hold on a second. I have my daughter in here helping me this morning, so we'll there. And there we go. Okay, can everyone see that okay? So we have several people on the webinar this morning. Like I said, we really appreciate taking some time visiting with us. We have, oh, that's fine. Okay, my daughter points out that you can't see me. That's okay. That's it. You can hear me though, okay, right? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So you won't be able to see my face, but you can hear me, and we're going to spend 30 minutes. It's now 10:02. So we will wrap this up at the bottom of the hour. And what I've done is I've put in some slides. There may be 10 slides or so for the presentation. And I've included some places that we can stop for questions here and there. So if you have a question, please raise that question, put it in the questions box, and then we'll answer that as we go along. We will jump in here. We're going to be talking about finances for young professionals. And what I've done, I've given a lot of thought to this. It's really, this webinar is a culmination of a lot of things that I've learned over the years and spent a lot of time talking with people about in lots of different circumstances. But I think it's really applicable for young professionals because we want to say, hey, how do we start getting off on the right foot? So we're gonna go through this slide deck, and it's going to be more general in conversation. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. We'll be talking about 7 concepts: assets, liabilities, cash flow, etc. You can see that. So the first thing that I want everyone to understand when we are getting into the workplace, when we're starting to make money, we're starting to get into adulthood, and even certainly after that, we want everyone to understand the concept of assets. So here we have I draw a distinction, an important distinction between financial assets and non-financial assets. So our financial assets, of course, are things that we own, right? So it might be a house, or it might be a 401k, it might be a car. And there are certain financial assets that are arguably better than others. Ideally, we want a financial asset that we don't have to work very hard. It can kind of just work on its own. And if any of you have been a landlord, for example, sometimes being a landlord can be a real pain. Or sometimes we say, oh, I think my car is an asset, but in fact, it depreciates over time. So a good definition for a financial asset is that it appreciates in the long run. Now it goes up and down, but it appreciates over the long run. And ideally, you don't have to work very hard. That's the ideal. But the most important thing is that it grows over time and that you own it. Now, non-financial assets, I really want to emphasize this point because there are a host of non-financial assets, because a lot of people say, oh, I don't have any assets. I'm young, or I'm poor. I don't really have anything. But in fact, everybody has non-financial assets. And arguably, those are even more powerful than financial assets. So your non-financial assets are your health, relationships, energy, hard work, the love that you have in your life, the time. When you're young, you have time, and time is a really good asset. Optimism is a good asset. So when we talk about assets, we want to make sure we're talking about both sets. Number two here is we want to identify your assets. And there are exercises that we can talk about offline about how we identify those. But we first want to identify our financial assets, pretty easy. But we also want to identify our non-financial assets to really be aware of those natural strengths that we have, relationships, and the like. The main point I want to drive home on this first concept of assets is the importance of focusing on your assets. And we'll talk about liabilities in a second, but I would argue it's healthier, it's more satisfying and more energetic to focus on assets rather than liabilities. So we want to focus on assets, and we want to acquire new assets whenever possible. Always be looking for an opportunity to buy a new asset. Last night I went with my wife. A nephew of ours just bought a wedding reception venue, and of course that's a major purchase. But he started out by buying a little kitchen. He rented out some kitchen. He started doing some catering. And then he bought something else, and then something else. And then he realized, oh, my business is growing. I'm actually going to buy a physical real estate property. So he's growing over time. Now that is stressful, and he has to worry about all sorts of business things, but his head is in the right space. He's always looking for the opportunity to buy a new asset. For most people, it may not be buying a business, but it is investing in their 401k, putting money in the bank, and investing that, always thinking about buying assets, owning assets. And then the last thing is we want to nurture our assets very diligently. And this gets back to number two, identifying. We want to identify those assets and nurture those. So if we have time, we want to make the most of our time if we're young. If we have health, we want to make the most of our health. If we have our non-financial assets, our ingenuity, we're really creative, we'll make sure we're being as creative as possible. Nurture those, grow those all the time. So that's assets. Liabilities we'll talk about next. There are also financial liabilities and non-financial liabilities. And that's the mirror opposite of what we have on the asset side. The financial liabilities, that is debt. Obviously, you owe money on a credit card or a mortgage, things that you owe people. And then the non-financial liabilities are weaknesses. Those might be things, bad habits, or I don't know, maybe you got a late start and you're 60 years old and you're starting to save for retirement at age 60. That's a liability because you're starting late. So the rule of thumb that I talk about when people are starting out and trying to develop good habits is we focus on the assets and we manage the liabilities. Obviously, we have to pay attention to the liabilities. We have to pay down the credit card. We have to pay off the car loan, etc. But my thinking is to more of a management mindset rather than, oh, I've got to get out of debt. I've got to get out of debt. Just a quick story for me. When I was younger, in my 20s, a couple of people who have good financial experience, they said, hey, Ben, I was really fixated on getting out of debt, and I was focused squarely on the liability side rather than the asset side, buying things. And they said, Ben, you've got it backwards. You need to focus on the assets first, manage the liabilities. I disregarded their advice. And for 15 years, I didn't save anything. I just focused on the liability side. And after 15 years, I still had liabilities, but I had nothing on the asset side to show for it. Then I got in this business 20 years ago, and I said, oh, I need to repent. I need to start practicing what I preach. And so I started saving at that point, focusing on the asset side. And now, 20 years later, oh, I still have liabilities. I still have debt. I wish I didn't. But the reality is that debt is very much a part of our life, of our lives. But I have assets. I've been working diligently for the last 20 years to build those assets, to nurture non-financial assets, and to actually buy assets whenever possible. 401k, I own my own business. I'm trying to think in that way, and I encourage everybody on the call to be thinking that way too. Are there any questions so far? Let me see if we have any. I'll go to our questions. Which is better, non-financial assets or financial? I would say, obviously, they're both good. If we're just talking unidimensionally, then financial assets. If we're just talking about finance, maybe finances is better. But if we want to live a rich life, I think that your non-financial assets overall are more important, because finances is just one part of our lives. So I think we can live a very rich life. And I also believe that if we are focused on our non-financial assets, then that will spill over into our financial assets, because we'll be being energetic, we'll be optimistic, and those things, they do translate into being better with our money. So if I had to choose, I would go with non-financial thing. When is it appropriate to pay off debt? So here you have this debate between, do I invest in assets or do I pay off debt? An example I use sometimes is, would you rather have $100,000 in the bank and $100,000 in debt? So that would be your net worth, which we'll talk about in a second. It's 1014. Okay, so we're halfway done. Your net worth is the same in either case. Would you rather have 100 and 100 or 0 and 0? In both cases, your net worth is the same, but I would rather have 100 and 100, because if you have $100,000 in assets, yes, you have $100,000 in liabilities, but with those $100,000 in assets, you have some options, both on the offense side, right? Like, hey, I want to buy a business. I want to invest. I want to help somebody in need. I want to do something proactive with that money. Or defense, I lose my job, I get sick. You have some backstop there. If you have no savings, no assets, and no liabilities, yes, good thing is you don't owe anybody any money, but you also don't have any cushion there. So I would encourage people to manage the debt, pay off the debt, but instead of accelerating, say you have a mortgage, and you say, should I pay off my car loan or should I pay off my mortgage? or should I invest in my 401k? I would say invest in your 401k over paying off that. Well, obviously you pay it off, but I wouldn't be super eager to accelerate those payments on the debt side. Rather, I would focus on the asset side. Please better have 50-50 essays. Let me, for the sake of time, I'm going to go on. There are a few more questions here. They're really good. So we'll skip there and get back to this presentation. Let's see if I can get full screen here. Okay. So the next concept I want to talk about is cash flow. So we're going to talk about cash flow and balance sheet next. So cash flow, that's money coming in, money going out. And in general, the concept is we want more money coming in than money going out. And of course, we could talk about that forever. How do we do that? What happens if we don't have enough money coming in? But for the purposes of today, I just want to introduce the concept of cash flow. It is the starting point for every discussion I have. If you call me and say, hey, Ben, I just want to talk about our finances, have a conversation with a financial advisor, the very first starting point is talk to me about your income compared to your expenses. Are you making ends meet? That is the starting point. So if you're not making ends meet, we go down path, A. Or I should say, if you are making ends meet, we go down path A. If we're not, we go down path B. Tracking those expenses is very helpful to really get a good sense. So as a starting point, if you're a young person getting into your career, I encourage you to track your expenses for a month or 2 or 3. Heaven knows there are lots of apps to help you do it, that sort of thing. We've helped many clients do that as well, to help them monitor that. How do you track it? And initially, I would not worry too much about, oh, I'm making extra or I'm running behind and I'm losing money every month. Don't worry about that. Just track it. And then after a while, then you can say, okay, I do have a good sense of naturally where my spending habits are, what my natural cash flow could be. Then you could potentially tighten the belt or whatever. So that's the main goal with cash flow. The second concept is balance sheet, also referred to as net worth. That is the difference between your assets and liabilities. The goal here is to have more assets than liabilities, which would result in a positive balance sheet or a positive net worth. So for those of you on the call who have studied accounting, these two concepts, the cash flow, also known as the income statement, and the balance sheet, are the two fundamental things we talk about in accounting. And there are reasons for both of those, right? Whether it's a business or whether it's your own life, you're going to be balancing, you want the money coming in, but you also want to be building your net worth. And a lot of people, I would say most people, think about the cash flow more than the balance sheet. So they say, hey, I'm paying the bills, I'm good. Or I'm not paying the bills, I'm not good. I encourage everyone on the call today to focus a little more on the balance sheet rather than the cash flow. So, there are times we make more money and we make less money. That's going to be dynamic. And there are times that the balance sheet goes up and down as well. But in general, by focusing on the balance sheet, then we are thinking more on the asset side as opposed to just like getting through day to day. And I would say, as a general rule, my experience has been is that wealthy people, financially wealthy people, tend to focus on the balance sheet more than the cash flow than the income statement. They're saying, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll pay the bills, but that's not where their head is. Their head, their mind, their focus on the balance sheet. Similar concept. So you see a theme here is balance sheet over income statement, although obviously there's a balance, of course. And in general, assets over liabilities. I think, let's see if we have some questions. Balancing your cash flow and your balance sheet, creating that balance we talked about there. I think that we're ready for some more questions. So let me hop over here. See if it is 10:20. We have 10 more minutes left. We're cruising along. We appreciate everybody's participation. We have a whole bunch of questions here. Let me see if I can scroll down to some questions here. Here's a question. I think I've answered that. If I have extra money, would I pay down debt or buy assets? I think we've answered that earlier. My suggestion, again, as a recap, is if you have debt that is credit card debt that is at 30% interest, obviously you want to get rid of credit card debt. And I would say, as a very rough rule of thumb, if your debt is above 6 or 7% roughly, I would pay that down more than the asset side. And so you want to get that debt under that 6, 7, maybe 8%. But I would say any debt that is below 6 or 7, maybe even 8%, certainly debt that is 2, 3, 4% range, I wouldn't accelerate that debt payment. I would go ahead and buy assets, invest in your 401k, save, put the money in the bank, things like that, more than paying off the debt. Another question is, what should I do if I'm not making ends meet? Yeah, that's a whole different conversation. I would say we track first. If we're not making ends meet, what we want to understand is this a temporary condition or is it a permanent condition? If you're consistently not making ends meet, then we have to have a much more serious conversation. What do we need to change that? Now, students are a little different, and there are many students on this call today because this is for young professionals. So students, we have to evaluate the benefit of going to school and the merits of going into debt, student debt for that. That's a long-term investment. That would be an example of we're prioritizing assets and the balance sheet over cash flow. So I do think that investing in one's education is, in almost all cases, a worthwhile investment. Not all cases. We can talk about that. But setting aside the student thing, if we're in a situation where we're perpetually, not making ends meet, that's going to require one of two things. You got to make more money or you've got to cut down your expenses. It's just that easy. There's not really too much there. Okay, so let's get back. We have 6 more minutes on this presentation. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Let's go to the next slide. Insurance. So another concept, and we're not going to go into these things because insurance is its own category, but we want to be thinking defense as well. So we're having our cash flow, we're building our balance sheet, assets, things like that. But we also want to think what could derail us in one split moment. What could send us off a completely different, into a different trajectory, an accident or a sickness, some serious problem. Some of those we cannot protect against. They are just fate of life, right? But there are some things that we can buy an insurance policy to protect against. And there are other things that we can do, getting back to the asset side, to mitigate the risk of having a bad thing. So health is always a risk. Well, what's a good way to prevent a health problem? Stay healthy. Do healthy habits. So I would say the preparing for the unwanted is a combination of some insurance, some logical things that are more financial and quantifiable, but they are also non-quantifiable lifestyle habits, relationships, building a support system. So when we do get into trouble, we have a plan of attack. We have people who care about us, people can rally around us, things like that. So that's what we'll talk about. And on another call, we can talk about insurance all day long. Lots to talk about with insurance. And the last thing I want to finish out with is the concept of values. So we want to, when we go through our lives, and certainly when it comes to money, we want to identify what we value. A lot of people that just go about saving money or spending money or going to college or thousands of financial decisions and actions that we're involved in that we just do without thinking about it. But I encourage everybody, particularly when you're starting out as an adult, is to be thinking about, what do I really want out of money? Because money is simply a means to an end. It's not an end unto itself. To just have a bunch of money, if you had $10 million sitting in the bank, there is no inherent virtue or benefit of that money. That money would just be a benefit insofar as it might give you peace of mind. You might be able to help other people, whatever the case may be. But the value, there's no intrinsic value in money itself. So, for instance, I had a conversation with my wife just, I think it was yesterday, and we were posing a situation that, how much would you pay me to do this, difficult thing, to live in, in a bad circumstance, an undesirable set of circumstances. And my wife and I agreed, like, you couldn't pay me enough money that to go through that particular experience. So we do know that there are a lot of things out there that money cannot buy. Those are your values. So stick to your values, but we want to identify them. We want to recognize when they're in conflict too. Now, the second thing, because sometimes we want an immediate thing, and sometimes that conflicts with a long-term. Or let's say that we get sick. Well, a value is taking care of our health, but another value is saving for the future. So what happens when we get sick? We need money to pay for the medical bills, but then that robs the ability to save for the future or to pay our regular bills. These kinds of things are things we need to talk about regularly. Ideally, we want to create harmony between our actions, what we're actually doing, and our values. So if we say, I value saving, I value a good retirement down the road, but we're not saving, there's some inconsistencies. And so insofar as we are not matching those, there's going to be a gap that's going to make us feel uncomfortable. Or we might say, I value experiences. I want to do something and live a rich life now. I want to go on vacation now. And we're putting all the money in the 401k and we have no money to live on. Lots of things like that. But we just want to make sure that those are in harmony. Be honest with ourselves. A lot of times we say, yes, I value X, but our actions don't even come close to honoring that. And so if we say, yeah, that saving for the future, that's having a good retirement, it's like, well, you're not saving. Or getting out of debt, you're spending money that you don't need to be spending. There are lots of consistencies. We're doing these all the time. So we want to be honest with ourselves. And lastly, have the discipline to act in harmony with our values. That, it is now 10:30. That wraps up the conversation. let me go to any final questions. Here's some contact information. Most of you on this call know us. I believe there are several people on the call who don't know us. We welcome you. We welcome a conversation, whether you know us already or you are meeting us for the first time. We invite you to reach out to us. We can help you. It doesn't cost you anything to have a conversation. And but let me, before I hang up, any final questions? Let's see. Question. Yeah, that's good. There are a couple more questions, but not enough to keep everybody on the call. That wraps. Now, if you want, this will officially end the call. If you want to have some further conversations, why don't you go ahead and send some questions, and we will continue the conversation for another 5 or 10 minutes. But thank you very much for joining us. I'm Ben Driggs, Navigate Financial, and we will have this webinar again in 1 month. Our goal is to have one webinar a month, the second Thursday of the month. So that is, I don't know when that is, in November or in August, but we will we'll let you know what that is. Be sure to follow us on Instagram. We're trying to build our follower base there, and we're posting things regularly. We'll be launching a podcast in the fall. That's going to be once a week, and that's going to be starting mid-September. So we have a lot of exciting things coming down the pike. Thank you for joining. We appreciate your time today. Goodbye, and you can stay on the call for another 5 minutes and ask some questions if you have any follow-up questions. So this is now, we're going to call this post. Let me ask a couple of questions. If I don't have children, do you think I need to get life insurance? Yeah, there's kind of, we talked about insurance just very briefly. That would be we talk to people, and we can talk about that offline. But I would say generally life insurance is about income replacement should you die. And so if you're married, but you don't have any children, then you have to factor in, if I die, what is going to happen to my surviving spouse? Is he or she going to be okay or not? And that would drive the conversation. If you have dependent children, particularly very young children, then absolutely we want to get a lot of just inexpensive term life insurance, so that if something were to happen to you, particularly if you're the primary or sole breadwinner, we want to make sure that there's ample income replacement going on should you die prematurely. Are there any other questions? Let's see. These are all really good. Do you think it's a good idea to start your own business? I'm a big fan of starting your own business. That is on the asset side. I believe it's important to invest in yourself. We are, at the end of the day, arguably our own best asset. So if we have a keen sense of our own strengths, of our own assets, of really those non-financial assets in particular, and financial as well. But if we have a keen sense of our non-financial assets, I'm good at this, I'm really good at this, I love doing this, these kinds of things, that really sparks the conversation of starting your own business. In general, people who start their business, if they do it thoughtfully, they can make more money doing their own business than working for someone else. Of course, there are more risks, it's more difficult, and we can be a support for you as you start your own business. I've started businesses. I have tons of friends and clients who started their own businesses. It is a topic about which I have a lot of passion and interest and experience. So we can have those conversations. What really is involved in starting your own business? But the bottom line answer to your question is yes. I really encourage people to take a hard look at starting their own business generally. See, I think that's it. That's it. Okay, it's 10:35. Thank you, everyone. We'll wrap it up. Until next time, have a wonderful day.